Her insight helps enterprises and solution providers develop strategies to meet the escalating demands of today's consumer and business customers. From Genesis, we have Lisa Abbott. Lisa has over 20 years of experience successfully driving marketing strategies for products that harness the web, social media, mobile, and voice as customer channels. She currently manages the team that defines the strategy and execution for the Genesis digital channels offer worldwide. Lisa is also recognized for driving the early adoption of social media for use within the contact center. She helps organizations that are looking to improve customer experience and evolve their customer interaction beyond voice to a true omni-channel strategy. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Lisa.
Thank you very much, Sally, and welcome to our listening audience. And Sheila, I am thrilled to be here with you for the next hour as we discuss the trends for 2016 in digital customer service. But before we jump in and start talking about our plans for 2016, I think it's important to reflect back on 2015. As we're coming to the end of the year, this was another really big year for the contact center, especially in terms of all the changes and trends that we saw out there. Sheila, can you please share with us some of your insight in what you considered to have been the key trends?
Yes, thank you, Lisa, and welcome, everyone. So I would say mobile first is a very key trend that obviously we saw start earlier than 2015, but really hit its stride, I think, in the last year. Historically, most contact centers have been designed from the voice side of the project first, leaving the mobile part as a secondary goal that gets accomplished later. There's a growing trend, not just in the contact center, but more broadly in with any kind of IT or technology project, to flip that on its head and actually begin with mobile considerations and then work toward the more traditional deployment options. So I think that was a
So Sheila, I think we have lost you in terms of, did you hit the mute button by chance? So while we're waiting to reconnect with Sheila, why don't I talk a little bit about some of these trends. As Sheila was mentioning, mobile first has really been key. I think the adoption around smartphones has really driven a lot of the engagement from a customer service perspective, and especially from a digital perspective. And then, of course, there's the whole proactive customer care that has taken place. From a virtual reality perspective, Sheila was mentioning, we saw the Google Glass that, had came onto the scene and then has, basically, come and gone to a certain extent. But that whole notion of virtual reality is out there. And then, of course, there is social media customer care. This is something that's near and dear to me. Back in 2010, from a Genesis perspective, we were one of the first contact center companies to actually deliver a tool that was designed specifically with the contact center in mind. And more we're starting to see the adoption of social as a way to engage from a customer service perspective. And all predictions show that probably in the next 2 years, you're going to see social taking on the level of importance in the contact center that we're seeing today with chat. So we should, stay tuned and looking for that. And then there's the whole notion of video chat, right? That has definitely come on the scene and more we're starting to see the adoption and the interest on either both one-way or two-way. I think the Mayday button was a good example of this. Some of the other key trends that Sheila doesn't have here listed that I can speak to as well is the emergence of multimodality. And what we mean by that is the simultaneous use of, two channels at the same time. We've seen a lot of contact centers talking about how they will be on the phone with someone who's also actively engaging with them on the web at the same time. And so we're more and more starting to see that there are multiple channels being utilized at any given time as they're engaging with you as a customer. So why don't we take a moment and see from our listening audience, what is the percentage of, digital interactions that you're seeing that's coming through your organization today? Is it less than, 25%? Is it 44%, around 55%? 75% or 87%. Later in the presentation today, assuming that we can reconnect with Sheila, we will be hearing from her talking about some research that's out there that has shown the projection for next year in terms of where we can expect to see with digital channels. So why don't you take a moment and fill that out, and I will advance quickly to see where we're at. Forward and see. Okay, so we see that, a good percentage of the listening audience is actually seeing quite an uptake in digital channels. It was all rather interesting that, when I joined Genesis back in 2008, we were really looking at single digits for the adoption around digital channels. And now we're seeing this, far going into, double digits. So this is, definitely from what I'm expected to see. So I've just gotten a note. Sheila's dialing back in. With all the technology, I'm sure we're all well aware that there are failures, and it's kind of interesting because we're going to be talking to you about some pretty sophisticated strategies here, in terms of implementing for the future, and I'm still amazed that we are unable to make our webinar software work properly. But with that said,
you're going to turn it back over to Sheila.
Yes, we're gonna introduce the notion of digital transformation. So welcome back, Sheila.
Apologies,
No worries. With all of this explosion of digital channels happening, digital transformation is one of those trends that's top of mind for all organizations. And, we hear a lot about it in the marketing organization, but we're seeing that digital transformation is really now taking place to include customer service in the contact center. And so, Sheila, if you could share with us now your perspective in terms of how this is really impacting the contact center, that would be great.
Yes, and now that I'm back, apologies to the audience. So contact centers have been around since the 1980s, doing a great job of distributing inbound voice calls to agents. And if your center does outbound calling, there are probably great solutions that you're using there, and your center is likely doing a pretty good job there as well. But how does your contact center's handling of web chat and email and SMS and social media stack up against your voice handling? This is research from CFI Group which is a firm that's a spinoff from the University of Michigan Business School. They're also the people who provide the American Customer Satisfaction Index that you may have seen. And they produced this research in 2015 comparing first contact resolution success by channel. And what you see here is, calling in on the phone, 65% first contact. That's a pretty good batting average. Self-service on the web, 78%. Where we're not doing as well is with online chat, with email, and likely not with SMS or social as well. So first contact center resolution rates are below those of voice interactions, and I think partially that's been because of the focus of contact centers. So if we move on to the next slide, what you see is research that compares to the poll that you just answered, okay? And so the poll that you answered had to do with what are the digital interactions in your business. And this is research from Dimension Data, who is a global systems integrator. And since 2006, they've been collecting data on exactly that question. And if you look at the graph, what you see is in 2006, the level was about what Lisa had talked about earlier, 5%, single digits. In 2008, had jumped to about 25%. Probably a slowing down of the growth curve for a few years there during the economic downturn, but certainly ramping back up again. And as you see here, what Dimension Data is forecasting is that in 2016 is the year that we're going to cross that chasm, where over half of the interactions coming into a contact center are going to be digital. And so this is a moment of change. We've talked about digital interactions for a long time. We've talked about email and web and social, but it's been sort of slow to come together in terms of becoming an important force. I think 2015, 2016, this is the year when that's happened and where we have to think about how we handle interactions in a completely new way.
Well, great. So along with all this adoption of digital channels, I know that there has to be challenges out there for our listening audience. So we would really like to hear what are your biggest challenges in being able to really deliver a consistent service experience across all communication channels. Is it about disjointed channels still being managed in silos? Or is it more about the lack of context sharing across channels? Is it about no single view of customer interactions, so you have agents working from multiple desktops? Or perhaps it's no visibility into the customer journey, so this is seen as discrete interactions. So go ahead and make your selection.
So I'm thinking that this disjointed channels still being managed in silos is going to get a sizable portion of the responses here. And I think it goes back to that notion of voice has always been such a predominant force in the contact center, and other channels were added on an ad-needed basis and sometimes with a third-party solution or even outsourced. So I suspect that that's going to have a fair amount of responses, that selection.
Well, let's see what our response says. You're right, Sheila. That is the bulk of the response there. But it's also interesting to see that people are realizing the importance of understanding the customer journey, because at the end of the day, that's really key to that customer engagement and that experience, as well as bringing efficiencies to your contact center. So this is great information and great data to see. So, speaking of the customer journey, from our perspective, how we define that within the industry, it's really about the overall collection of all those interactions and the steps that your customers are undertaking when they're really trying to get to answers or have their issues solved. And so, this journey, it also provides that context to that organization on what that customer is trying to achieve or on what path of action the customer is on. And so companies that value that journey concept tend to put the customer at the center of everything they do. And from how they market, how they develop their products and their services, and also how they have designed their customer service and contact center operations. So Sheila, can you tell us more from a journey perspective, where does this really start within the contact center?
Yeah, so as you see in this graphic here that is so different than what we might have seen from a buying process slide, 10 or 15 years ago. I think back to my own days as in marketing classes and business schools. Even customers that call the contact center today likely have started their journey on the web or the mobile phone. Picking up the phone and calling a company to place an order to resolve a customer service issue is rarely the first choice of consumers anymore. So it comes down to your contact center policies and procedures recognizing that fact and equipping agents with knowledge of the other customer interactions that may have happened 2 minutes ago or 3 days ago or last month. And one of the things we're trying to highlight here with this graphic is the contact center has now become that interaction choice of last resort. It's the one where the difficult questions are coming. It's the one where the frustrated customers are coming. And so its importance is certainly not diminished, but what has changed is what an agent needs to know when that customer calls on the phone. That has changed dramatically in the last couple of years.
Well, so the next logical step here is, with all of this information you've shared, it would be really great if you could go through for us what some areas of focus as we put together this roadmap for digital customer service for next year. If you could kind of go through some steps of, where to begin and where should we be focusing?
Absolutely. So the number one, these are sort of goals, goals to set, deliver the same excellence to digital interactions that you bring to voice today. System of engagement, that phrase, refers to a transition from current contact centers that are designed around discrete pieces of information, like records, to systems which are more decentralized and incorporate technologies which encourage peer interactions and which often leverage cloud technologies to provide the capabilities to enable those interactions. So let's think, for example, about social applications. The best way to encourage customers to talk to you is to have a strong social presence, and it gives you a real-time access to your customer base. But that information, even if social is being handled by a different department in your business, marketing or whatever, one of the things that you want to do is make sure that there's an integration of the information in that system in a real-time way to your customer care system. So it's not even so much about everything being under one umbrella as much as all systems being connected. So siloed contact center systems are not necessarily about doing everything, but making sure that everything is connected. The next survival tip I want to talk about is taking self-service options to a whole new level. Just like there's data that says that more and more interactions start in a digital way and sometimes complete in a digital way, there's a lot of data that's been collected, certainly in 2015, that customers like self-service options. Back 10, 15 years ago, when IVRs first began, integrated voice response systems, they were often seen by companies as ways to decrease costs by sort of forcing customers to use self-service options. Well, customers no longer think about self-service as a punishment. They think of it as often their first choice. I would just as soon not have to contact a company. I'd rather get everything done myself. This quote from Greta Garbo really makes me think about how self-service needs to be done well. I never said I want to be alone. I only said I want to be left alone. And to me, this is so evocative of what happens sometimes on a website. You go to a website and you're not there 5 seconds, and a chat request comes up from the company. The goal is not to constantly berate a customer. The goal is to have a system of engagement with a set of rules that only kicks in something like a chat request when certain parameters have been met. When there's a way of using analytics to measure and say that this is a customer who could benefit from an engagement, a live engagement. So leave customers alone when they want to be left alone. Look at your systems to say, are we allowing customers to do enough on their own? And that's the other point. I mean, IVRs in the past were often thought of as a place to do very simple interactions, right? Check if a check cleared. Did my balance get posted, right? Today, it's more about increasing the level of task that a customer can do with self-service because customers are more than willing and want those options. So I think the second tip here is about reevaluating how you feel about self-service and perhaps making more types of interactions able to be completed by customers using self-service.
I think those are all really great points, Sheila. And I would add to that while you're providing a great self-service strategy as part of your overall contact center and customer service experience, you also need to look at having a seamless way to escalate to assisted service when it's wanted. Again, people get very frustrated when they're in a mobile app and they can't find a way to request a callback or a way to escalate for assistance without getting out and calling an 800 number. And that's really broken. That's not making things positive for the customer, and it's also very inefficient because you should be able to seamlessly carry that context and that already authentication over to the agent. So again, self-service has really become the primary desired way for customers to engage with you, but you have to, plan for the case where eventually they're going to want to escalate to you. So from your next perspective, can you tell us a little bit more about how to go about working out the customer journey?
So I love this graphic about, the low-hanging fruit. Too often, meaningful change is avoided because of a faulty assumption that one solution has to be able to handle every possible use case, right? Companies think about, well, customer journey, that sounds very complicated. I have to think about every single possible scenario and have a way to handle that scenario. Another way of looking at it is to think of the 80-20 rule. Handling 80% of your contacts' emails could likely benefit from an improved knowledge system that allows agents to quickly find answers to common issues. 4 out of 5 questions now are probably handled by live agents and could be handled using chat instead of voice more efficiently if the customers were given that option. So it comes down to identifying a few customer journeys and the ones that are probably your customer contact management could name for you in 3 minutes. It's not about going out and getting a consultant and mapping customer journeys. I think it's more about asking existing contact center management, what are the top journeys? What are the current pitfalls as customers try and complete those journeys, and then working on those. So I think it comes down to just picking a few and perfecting those, and then obviously increasing the number of journeys that you look at and maximize. It's about decreasing the number of steps it takes for a customer to get done what they want to get done.
And I would also add to that, the proactive, capability as part of that, right? A lot of times as a company, we know what the next step in that customer journey is going to be. So there's lots of ways we can circumvent that unnecessary phone call to the contact center or that reach out by just proactively sending the information that's, may be part of an onboarding process or whatever. So as you're looking at that and determining within those journeys where your failure points are, and maybe measuring to a metric as simple as making it easy for your customer, it's important to look both reactively and proactively. So Sheila, why don't you tell us about, staffing and the recruiting process to make sure that companies can adequately handle, the digital customer service?
Absolutely. So in our personal lives, we're obsessed, right, with having the latest and the greatest technological advancement to hit the market. But when it comes to staffing our contact centers and how we do it, and the decisions that we make, perhaps we're not applying the same concepts. So I think there's 2 points I want to make here. Number one, the agents that you're hiring today are agents that are going to be there for the next 3, 4, 5 years, as the world continues to, change very rapidly from a technological point of view. So certainly a survival tip for 2016 is to step back and review your agent recruiting practices. The type of agent that you looked for 3 or 4 years ago is different from the agent that you need tomorrow. The one you need tomorrow doesn't just look up something or place an order for a customer. They're being called on to handle complex scenarios with lots of different sources of information. And that means perhaps changing the type of person that you're recruiting to be an agent. And the second is to use new methods to find your agents and to make available to them the ability to work from home and have a more flexible schedule. I mean, today's millennials have values that are perhaps slightly different than, boomers like me or Xers like Lisa here. Their values are about a little bit more flexible time. And so as you think about hiring agents, perhaps, again, think about how can we add flexibility to the way we let agents do their jobs to be more attractive to the kind of agent that's going to be most successful handling today's customers. So I think there's, as I said, 2 sides of this. Who are you hiring, and then how are you looking at hiring them? So last survival tip is kind of a, it's time to start looking forward almost even beyond 2016. CIOs around the globe are working to understand the impact that the Internet of Things is going to have on their business. And conceptually, the Internet of Things is about all the devices that are now connected to the Internet. For the last 2 or 3 years, health monitoring devices like Fitbits were what people thought of top of mind when they thought of the Internet of Things. But it's well beyond that now. There's a project called the Connected Devices Project that's trying to keep track of the different types of devices that are classified under Internet of Things. They've classified over 2,000 devices in 73 different categories. And as I said, it's not just about health monitors. It's about, in business to business, it's about levels of materials that are available for the manufacturing process. I heard just yesterday a great use case of putting a device into the bracelets that are put on you when you go into a hospital. And for rules to be put against that bracelet that say, if this person waits for an X-ray more than X number of minutes, send an alert to someone. Or if this person's results aren't back from the lab within 45 minutes and they're sitting somewhere, alert someone. So it's a much broader play now, thinking about what are the possibilities in your industry. What is your CIO looking at in terms of the Internet of Things and ways that it might be incorporated into your business? And then as you think of that, how is that going to impact customer care? Right? So I'm going to give my Fitbit example here because it's such a great one. I happened to be in San Francisco a year ago, and my Fitbit failed. And I was here for a big show, and I knew I'd be doing a lot of steps. So I just happened to tweet out, what a time for my Fitbit to fail. Proactively got an email from Fitbit saying, have you tried this? Have you tried that? So I tried the things they suggested, and it still didn't work. I got another email. We see that you tried to restart your Fitbit 3 times. Clearly, there's a hardware misfunction. We have sent a new one to your hotel. That's the one thing about being completely transparent on social. Anybody can find me, usually at any moment of the day. But it was the kind of customer care wow experience that really talks to some of the things that we're saying here today about proactive care, about incorporating Internet of Things, about reaching out on social media as a data source about your customers. Because I put it out there, it's an open thing. Obviously, I'm not concerned with that data, or I wouldn't put it out there. So, stepping back, it's like, what is happening in your industry? What is happening in your CIO's office that may impact the kind of data that's available to one of your agents in a way to better manage that customer journey?
Well, Sheila, as we look at these tips and start to put together this roadmap for 2016 in terms of how we can evolve our contact center and our customer service to address these trends and these predictions, what can we really expect to be the tangible outcomes from this?
So, it's nice. It would be nice in the world, right, if all we cared about was happy customers, right? But obviously, everyone has a business to run or an organization's needs to meet. According to a study released just in October 2015, 60% of consumers who used their smartphones to research decisions while in a store made a purchase at that physical location. And then 35%, almost then all of them, ultimately did purchase something online. It's never been more clear that consumer buying behavior has moved to mobile devices. So meeting your customers on digital channels is no longer an option that companies can consider supporting. It's become an imperative. If you are not there to support customers with their digital interactions, they will find retailers and service providers that will. And if you're one of the early adopters in your vertical or your geographic market, you'll win net new business abandoned by these technology laggards. So as I said, it's no longer a choice. It's an imperative because customers will go to those who make that customer journey the easiest. And I think we have another polling question here now.
Yep, and so, given all this that we've heard, talk about trends and predictions for 2016 and steps we should be looking at, we're curious to see from our listening audience what is going to be your top area of focus in your contact center for 2016. Is it going to be about adding digital channels? Is it going to be about moving from multi-channel to omni-channel? Or is it going to be about improving that agent productivity by providing insight across all those channels? And, the other option is, are you going to be focusing more on analytics and increased visibility? And how many of you are going to be mapping the customer journey as part of your 2016 objectives?
So I think adding additional digital channels is going to be one of the high responses here. And the reason being, a lot of companies have, while they may have implemented channels, they may not have brought them into the contact center. And I think there is an increasing awareness that the way that we in the contact center can queue and route and measure interactions adds value. And to the extent that there are more and more digital interactions, that value becomes increasingly important.
Well, let's take a look and see where our audience was. Well, it looks like you were close. It looks like journey mapping and adding additional channels are top, followed closely about moving to omni-channel, and that makes sense because they're all very closely related. You know, omni-channel and journey mapping are really areas of focus that most companies are looking at when they're trying to improve that customer engagement, that customer experience. So it makes a lot of sense that people are looking at that hand in hand. Any thoughts from you, Sheila?
I'm pleasantly surprised to see the mapping the customer journey peak up to as high as it does here. And I'm going to pat myself on the back and say, you know, if you don't think about it as this one big mammoth effort, and if you really do just size the project down, and perhaps some of these respondents have realized I don't have to boil the ocean. So I think we can take a little bit of credit here, Lisa.
Well, with that said, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how the technology can play a role in this as you're pulling together your strategy for 2016. As we well know, technology is only part of the triad along with the people in the process. But what, you know, we talked about earlier about a system of engagement. From a Genesys perspective, we look at that as an omni-channel engagement center. And so with all those changes happening in the contact center and beyond, and with the influx of these interactions from digital channels and customer journeys, we really need to ask ourselves how are we going to be able to manage and address this in a very unified manner so that we're able to deliver that, you know, consistent experience that these customers have come to expect today. And, you know, so an omni-channel engagement center is really about a real-time system that allows you to manage and engage with customers consistently across any touch point or interaction. So from a Genesys perspective, you know, it's about having a broad and deeply integrated platform with, you know, one to unlimited scalability and, you know, an appropriate ease of use. And that's going to be able to allow you to design, orchestrate, monitor, and continuously tune consistent, seamless, personalized, and journey-specific experiences across all of these touch points and channels. And it's going to be able to support, you know, contextual self-service, as we talked about. It's going to allow for, you know, website event monitoring that's going to be able to trigger those proactive customer engagements when appropriate. And it's going to provide that 360-degree view and analysis of that full customer journey, including all the interactions, you know, supporting operations and workforce behaviors. And so as part of that, I'd like to share with you kind of 4 key areas to look at when you're putting together that omni-channel roadmap. And the first is basically ensuring that you have a solid architecture to work with as part of your contact center modernization project. You know, it's very likely that most of you already have an existing infrastructure in your contact center, so implementing a new platform is not as simple as, you know, flipping a switch. So in order to be able to migrate to a new environment, you really need to make sure that that your platform can, you know, first of all, utilize your data network for both voice transportation. So being able to consolidate those networks is going to save you money, so you no longer need to have to maintain 2 networks, you know, one for voice and one for data. And you can also implement a data center approach for your contact center platform and administrate, you know, the solution centrally. You know, you're going to be looking and making decisions on, am I going to move forward on premise? Am I going to be looking at a cloud model? You know, how, you know, is this an open platform? How resilient and scalable is it going to be? And am I going to be adopting, you know, a SIP-based architecture that's going to be flexible enough that is going to allow me to, you know, migrate my platform at my pace and in my time frame? And so the second key area to look at is about covering all the communication channels. So, you know, we've talked a lot today about this, and you need to be able to support multiple communication channels, you know, to get the customer's question answered or to, you know, solve their problems. And this really means that you need a platform that is able to manage all of these channels from a single set of business rules and administration and design tools. This is very key. And only when you can opt for a single platform approach will you really be able to deliver on that consistent customer experience and manage those service levels across all of those channels without having to, administer and operate multiple systems. I can't tell you, it goes back to some of your earlier comments, Sheila, around the fact that customers still aren't treating channels equal in terms of how they monitor and respond and actually handle the quality monitoring of that. And so also such an approach is going to allow you to be able to design that customer journey that can truly understand the journey context based on the customer's value, their historical behavior across channels, and also provide a very personalized and efficient experience. And of course, our next step has to do with optimizing your workforce. Your employees have the biggest impact on your company. So it's really important that you're, as effective as possible in giving them proper training and information, and that there's, you're looking at the management of their schedules. And so this is key to better understand your available resources at any given time. So as you begin to route those interactions, if you're keeping the schedule in mind, that's going to allow you to utilize your agents based on their skills and schedule, that's going to ensure that those interactions are really directed to that right agent at the right time. And along with voice and text interaction recording, that has really become a requirement based on compliance and legislative reasons. And, then you have your speech and your text analytics, which is really allowing you to get a true understanding of what is happening between that employee and that customer in that moment. Disposition codes are only going to get you so far. And then, of course, there's the quality management aspect, which is going to ensure that your quality metrics are achieved, which has a great impact on improving that customer experience. And then those learnings from that monitoring in a real-time environment should really be used for coaching the employees so that they understand where their shortcomings are and how they can really mitigate and deliver a much better experience and resolving issues quicker. And lastly, it's about being able to manage that end-to-end experience. Very often, your workforce does much more than just handling those customer interactions that come through the phone or digital communication channel. They oftentimes are working on approving claims or activating a change in a cell data plan subscription, or maybe they're following up on a sales lead that came through your website, for example. We refer to this as offline work, and this is really also part of the customer experience and really, and also part of the journey, and really needs to be managed in a precise and consistent as all of the other communication channels. So it's only when you make these work items part of the universal queue and through an integrated platform architecture, you can really deliver this consistent end-to-end experience. And so you also have to measure and manage all of that employee activity very consistently, and it'll increase the productivity of your workforce for these offline activities. And many of the organizations, our customers that have actually adopted this and looked at it in this way are already seeing, productivity gains of at least 20% within their organizations around what was seen as previously unmanaged activities. So to wrap up today, before we go into our Q&A, just, to summarize, our key takeaways here, it's about delivering that same excellence to digital interactions that you're bringing to voice today, making self-service a key integral part of your contact center customer service strategy, and doing it in a way that's going to provide seamless escalation for assistance as needed, and being able to target a few of those journeys to be able to improve on for the customer from an end-to-end perspective. And then again, reviewing, your agent recruiting practices and ensuring that you're hiring to be able to most efficiently handle all of the changes that are happening within the contact center, and also to start planning now for that emerging digital interactions that are really driven by the Internet of Things. And ensuring, again, that you have the right solutions that can actually support an omni-channel customer engagement. So with that, I'd like to turn this back to Sally, who's got questions from our viewing audience that we're going to respond with. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Sheila, for both of your great insights. We do have a bunch of questions that have come in, but again, as a reminder to participate in the Q&A, just submit your question in the Q&A window on the right side, and we'll get to as many as we can in the next couple minutes here. So the first question that I have is for you, Sheila. What new measurements will be required in the contact center as we incorporate more and more digital channels?
So, I mean, the kinds of measurements that really don't exist today, but that we want to think about in the future are things like one channel resolution. So can something be completely managed within a channel without having to jump channel? The number of channels required for resolution. Again, unless you look at something from a journey perspective, you can't see that. So if today you see a measurement that says this customer used 5 different channels, and that's quite possible, it's an opportunity to look and say, can we decrease the number of channels required to get to resolution? And by bringing that average from 5 to 4 or 3.5, are we improving that customer effort that's we found is so important in terms of customer satisfaction? So those are just a couple of the examples that change when you start looking at an entire journey and when you have multiple channels in the contact center.
Great. Thank you, Sheila. The next question is, should every contact center have to offer every possible channel of interaction?
And if that's for me, I'm going to take it. Obviously, you know, any question that says, does every have to do everything, the answer is going to be no. Certainly, you know, it depends on the kind of center that you have. There's a big distinction, for example, between business to consumer and business to business contact centers, right? So with business to business, there may not be the need to support social channels, for example. But for business to business, there may be an increased requirement to bring in a new kind of channel that's being called persistent channel, a persistent chat. Think about a trouble ticket that may span several days. You know, in the past, those are often managed quite well with CRM systems or ticketing systems, but that kind of information should also be part of a system of engagement. The agent needs to have access to those. So, again, I think there are different types of centers that have different requirements, and so, you know, nobody is saying that every center has to support every channel, but I think most contact centers would benefit from taking a broader view than they've had today.
Thank you, Sheila. We have another question for you, and that is asking, how do you measure workload in this new multi-channel environment?
And it, you know, obviously it becomes more difficult, right? It used to be so easy to just say X number of calls or X number of emails. So, you know, probably less to think about workload than effectiveness, all right? Effectiveness in terms of the amount of, I mean, certain metrics don't change, the amount of time to resolution. I'm a terrible contact center caller because during the course of a long interaction, I will often say, okay, so we have now been on the phone for 27 minutes, and I understand that you're going to put me on hold again. I just wanted to make that metric part of the recording. And so time is still important, but it's no longer about 3-minute interactions. It's about understand how effective was an agent as they got to resolution. So as I said, I think the best metrics now are about effectiveness. How long did it take for the agent to find the right information? How long did it take for the agent to complete whatever was required for whatever escalation? So time is still important, but the measurements have certainly changed. Do you have a comment to make on that, Lisa?
No, I think you covered that pretty well.
Okay.
Well, the next question that we do have is for you, Lisa, and that is asking how many users or what percentage of users tend to connect to the contact center over video, or is this a future trend?
Actually, we are definitely seeing adoption. We probably, I would say within our customer base, we've seen earlier adoption, especially in the banking industry, and also very strongly in EMEA. We've also have several large banks in North America as well that are using video quite rigorously from a customer service customer engagement perspective. I think the adoption is probably between 10 to 20% at this point. Sheila, do you have any more inkling in terms of video adoption from what you've seen?
I think, one of the points that you made there, Lisa, was about specific verticals. And I totally agree that we're seeing a lot in financial services and to your point, a lot in EMEA and in the European region. I think the other thing we're seeing is very specific use cases. I'm thinking, for example, of a company that does language interpretation, right? And in the past, that has meant putting two people on a phone on a conference. So let's say you're a French speaker and you walk into a U.S. bank, okay? How does the bank handle that transaction? Well, there have been capabilities where you have a phone there that has two handsets, and you give one to the customer and one to the teller or whoever, and there's an interpreter in between, right? Instead of doing that over video, think of that happening over the equivalent of an iPad, where the person doing the translation can see the person, because there's so much language that is visual, right? And then the agent can also see what's going on. So coming back to that, I think there's some very specific vertical use cases that open up because the technology choices are so much richer. I just used the word iPad. In the past, we would have thought about, think about when banking first started doing video, very specific, proprietary kiosk and that technology. With the cost of high-def screens and the availability of something like tablets, the accessibility to video is so much easier. So I think it's about certain verticals, certain industries, as you said, but I think it's also some very specific use cases. So it's about thinking about what are those possible use cases in your business, because I think the technology is there to do it.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting from the financial perspective on this topic. We see a lot of banks going to be becoming digital-first banks. So, more and more we see branches kind of fading away or taking on a very different role. And we see that the transaction part of what the branch used to be is becoming much more what is handled from an online experience. And so there's one loophole that I have seen in several of our customers that, it used to be, I think, that in opening or doing some steps of a mortgage process or a loan process needed to be a face-to-face process. So by using video in these digital-first banks, they've been able to get around that loophole where, they don't have to be in a branch to do that they can actually do that face-to-face over a video scenario. So anyway, that's just another interesting aspect of that. So Sally, what's our next question?
Yeah, thank you both for that. The next question I will also direct to you, Lisa. Do you see mobile instant messaging networks being part of mobile or as a separate interaction channel?
Well, it's kind of interesting from a Genesys perspective. We do have a specific product that supports instant messaging or text messaging. We do see that managed in a similar fashion as you would manage email or basically any other communication aspect. From a mobile perspective, we're looking at that as being more where you're integrating into your app, the ability to bring and share the context and escalate for assistance. So we do see it as a separate channel, from that perspective. Sheila, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, as it turns out, I'm participating in a conference this week that's about a new kind of collaboration tool that's becoming more common, so sort of a Slack-like tool that's being offered now by more and more kinds of technology companies. And I think the type of interaction type that it is introducing is this persistent chat, or a place or a room where an ongoing conversation or journey can be managed. So I think there's this possibility that a new type of chat is emerging that is not once and done, but has life over time. And so I think that may be the other thing about that kind of chat is it can jump across devices, from a browser to a tablet to a mobile phone. So it sort of hits one of the other questions that I saw on the list. What kind of new channels do we see coming? And I think that notion of persistent chat is one that I think we're going to hear a lot about in 2016.
Thank you, Sheila. And thank you, Lisa, for your great insights. And of course, thank you to the audience for sending in your questions. We are out of time for the Q&A portion, but for those who we weren't able to get to, we will try to have somebody from Genesis reach out offline. So for some more information around today's topic, we have a couple of resources available. 2 ebooks. One is on best practices for a seamless omni-channel experience, and another on journey mapping, an outside-in approach for delivering great CX. Also available is a short tip sheet on building the business case for an omni-channel contact center. All of these resources can be found on our website at genesis.com, but you can also access them now directly through the Resource Center widget on the bottom right corner of the screen. And lastly, as a friendly reminder, if you could also fill out the survey that will show up at the end of the webinar, we would really appreciate your feedback. If you have any additional questions on today's topic, please email us at enterprise.programs@genesis.com with the topic of today's webinar in the subject line. Feel free to continue to engage with us through any of our social channels, as well as subscribe to our blog, which is updated daily. On behalf of our speakers, Sheila, Lisa, and myself, thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to having you join us again in the future.